Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Holland. I'm a businessman. I'm an entrepreneur. I've worked in the corporate world as a CPA, and I've worked in the investment and financial services industry. I've started and sold multiple companies with multi-million-dollar valuations and multi-million dollars in revenue. Thank you so much for listening to us each and every Wednesday, where we talk about business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Be sure to follow us on our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, so that you get the weekly updates when we post them every Wednesday of the video version. You can find more about the podcast, and we continue the conversation outside of the podcast on Twitter. My Twitter handle is A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast. And of course, you can visit us on our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com. Today, I have a very special guest in the audience, in the studio with us, Caleb Holland. Now you notice we have the same last name because we're brothers. And Caleb and I have been in business for the better part of 10 years. And there are a whole set of unique challenges that come with being in business, number one, in general. Number two, having a business partner. And number three, having a business partner that's in your family. And so I've asked Caleb to come on the podcast, and likely we're going to have a series of these with Caleb because we often find ourselves when we're working in the number of businesses that we are in together, having very in-depth, meaningful conversations about business and what it's like to be in business and the struggles that we went through early on and the struggles that we go through now. So we're going to have a lot of fun with this. Of course, we grew up together, but as I said, we've been in business. And Caleb, welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So obviously I know a bit about your story, although we kind of separated ways after high school, took very different paths, have very different skill sets and capabilities, and that has been a huge benefit to the businesses that we've been involved in. Of course, being family members, we often want to kill each other. So, or you can maybe get a little bit more intense with those that are closest to you. But for our audience, take us back. You graduate from high school. Give us an idea of how you got to where you are today. And then we'll talk about some of the things that you're, at least to start in this episode. And again, like I said, we'll have multiple episodes with Caleb because there's so many good conversations that we have. They're not going to all be right in a row. So I'll consider it kind of the Holland Brothers Series when we have Caleb join us. But take us back, give our listeners a little bit of idea of your story, how you got to where you are, what your skill sets are, etc.
So actually step back, you said after high school. I'm going to start just before I left high school, actually. So during school and the big part of my young life, I wanted to be an auto mechanic. That was kind of like my, let's say, dream job. I know I'm shooting for the stars here. And I took an auto class in high school, and I really liked it. Then I took a woodshop class, and it changed my whole look on what I want to do as a career. So never having been exposed to it, other than, maybe building a deck with my dad in our house when we were younger. I didn't really have any classical training, what they call it, professional training, in the woodworking field. Well, this teacher that I worked with, really great teacher, Shannon Minch, I think was his name, he got a job for me over the summer, my junior year. So going into senior year, he got a job for me at a construction company in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. That's where we grew up. And it was really great. But what I really found out that when I'm doing something that I actually love to do, it is really hard for me to do it under somebody else. Now, I was learning a lot, and I didn't realize it right away that I didn't like working under people until I really knew the trade. And then I started seeing that people who are over you, your bosses and stuff, and this could just be an experience that I had, but they like to make up rules just for the sake of making up rules. And I'll give an example here. I don't know if it's necessary, but I remember spending all day nailing on these boards in trusses, and the job foreman there came to me and said, "Why did you nail those all up like that? They have to be at the top of the truss. Rip all the nails out." I mean, this was a really hard spot to get nails into, so taking them out took another further day, only to move them where he wanted to. And I asked him, "Why are we moving it? They'd be better where they are." And he said, "No, that's not where we do it." And I actually find out years later, when I went into business for myself, reading the actual blueprints, but where I put them is where they're actually supposed to be by design. And that's just an example of when you work under somebody, why it didn't work out for me. I needed to have a good reason for why we did things. And now it kind of goes into, I've worked with my brother in his garbage company that he had. That's kind of how I left that field for a little while. And he always talks about, are you born an entrepreneur or are you made one? Well, I don't really know the answer for that, but I do remember him coming to me one day and he said, "You know what? We should start a construction company. You've got the skills." He's like, "What do we need to do to start this construction company?" And I told him, "Well, basically, I have the tools. We just need a truck and a trailer, and let's get this thing started." And then he's like, "Okay, now why would I buy that stuff for you to start this business?" And I said, "Well, you shouldn't." That was the answer I gave, because I didn't see myself as an entrepreneur, or I couldn't see myself running a business or understanding all the logistics. And that's why it helps to have someone who does know all the financials and all the bank reports. And I basically don't know any of that. I mean, do you remember that conversation that we had?
Well, so that's one of the things that often is interesting in our relationship. I remember nothing and Caleb remembers everything to the, a, and, or, but, which is good, and sometimes it also gets us into trouble a lot of other times. But I don't remember that specific conversation. I remember 2013 coming to you and saying, I remember you being extremely frustrated with the company you were working with. And Caleb was instrumental in the business, as he said, that Jeff and I had, Provider Waste Services. And we wouldn't have gotten to where we are without him, oftentimes sacrificing family, sacrificing self-time, helping us when we needed it the most and struggled the most. And I think you'll remember, if you listen to one of my earlier podcasts, anybody who thinks that they can be successful in business on an island without family or friends or without someone helping you, without having a support group, number one, is going to fail. And number two, clearly has never been there, because that's part of the journey and the experience is figuring out who really is your support system and who really is going to, no matter thick or thin, be there when you most need it. And that's a whole podcast we could talk about in and of itself. But I want to back up because you covered a lot of topics and then get back to your narrative and your history. One of the things that you identified, and I think that anybody that's worked in the corporate world, as I have, as you have, or for someone else, when they see someone under them, and you can always tell whether the culture of that company is particularly strong, not to say that you can't have a solid culture at a company and just have one bad apple in middle management or senior management, but oftentimes when they see someone below them surpassing their skills and capabilities, you will see them react in a way that indicates that they are clearly threatened. What I heard you say is you followed the blueprint, and it wasn't as if you were trying to disobey authority for the sake of disobeying authority. You had followed the blueprint and done exactly what you believed you should be doing, which you should have been doing, not just believed it, but that's what you should have been doing. And this job supervisor clearly felt threatened by you. That's how I read that story. And I think any of us who have been in a situation like that, I know I have been, and most people I think who's worked for someone else and have surpassed the boss, if you will, you can quickly identify whether the person above you actually cares about your growth and development, or whether they feel threatened by your growth and development. And one of my favorite sayings of all times is, it's not what the people above you say about you, it's about what the people below you say about you. And I think in so many organizations throughout the United States and quite frankly across the world, that is forgotten. And all people focus on who are trying to move up the corporate ladder. And even in businesses, small businesses, sometimes owners think that way. And many of the guests that I've had on my podcast talk about that exact thing. They have said we are most successful when we basically view our employees as the foundation of our companies, because they are, and we would have nothing without them. So before we keep going on your narrative, we've kind of gotten into a topic that we could go on for 30 minutes. And this is why Caleb's going to be on multiple times, because we've been through so much together. We've seen pretty much everything in business. And then when you add the family connection, and we've had it hard. I mean, it's very hard to be in business in general. It's very hard to have business partners sometimes. And I've always said, it doesn't matter who you're going to have as your business partner. If you can't trust them, I don't care what they bring to the table, don't get in business with them. I don't care if it's money. I don't care if it's skills. I don't care if it's patents. I don't care what it is. If you can't trust them, run away. So that aspect, and then having the familial connection, brings its own challenges. It also has its benefits, especially when you grow up, because there's a lot of nostalgia on the tough days that you can talk about, etc. So we'll talk about all of those things, the good, the bad, the ugly, business partnerships, the familial side of things. But wanting to go back to that point you made, really, that individual felt threatened by you.
For sure. And he was the type of person that he wanted a yes man, that whenever he told you to, you just, yep, we'll do it. But then at the same time, he would get frustrated if he couldn't come up with better solutions and stuff. Well, if everyone just tells you, yep, that'll work, yep, your idea is good, even though they don't think it will, well, nothing is ever going to get done. So that attitude really breeds terrible culture, kind of like what you were saying. And the culture there, and I haven't been working for a lot of businesses, so I'm not sure if this is everywhere, but it was really, everyone would be willing to cut the throat of the next guy to get ahead. And I'm sure this was blue collar. I'm sure in white collar it's even worse. And
yeah,
after talking to Andrew here, I know it's worse. But I remember I worked with a guy all day, and I was just working circles around him. And at the end of the day, the boss comes up to me and said, "Hey, Johnny that you were working with said you weren't working very hard today. He said he was just killing you out there." And I'm like, "Yeah, right." And I was just joking. I'm like, "Are you being serious?" He's like, "Yeah." He said, "You were really slow there today." And that's just what it was like there. And I'm thinking it's that way for a lot of companies. And I just do not understand that mindset.
And that's the way of the world. And the point of talking about this is I could bring up multiple examples in the corporate world, that white collar, that are similar to that. And so if you're listening to this, maybe you're working for someone right now and you feel like you're stuck in that situation. I think step number one with dealing with that is, number one, you can't control how other people treat you, but you can control how you react and the power that they have over you. So if someone's like that, you have to be sure to have the mental strength to work through it. Just identifying that a person is like that or not like that, I think, is step number one. And then mentally preparing for it. And, again, blue collar is a little bit different because I know you're on the job site, and especially in the situation you were talking about, they're kind of the job suit. But in the white collar worker, you sometimes have more separation, you sometimes have less separation. But point being is, if you're in that situation, number one, at least you've identified that. And number two, don't let that impact your focus on what you can provide to the company, your skill sets. If someone's doing things that make you, or they feel threatened by you, they're going to try to belittle you. That's what it comes down to. Don't give them the power of letting it be effective. I know that can be really hard to do because I've been there. Caleb, you've been there. But it's important that you don't give them the power, because that only has a negative impact on your ability to continue being successful and your mental health. So we diverged a little bit on a main point. We'll have lots of opportunities to talk about some of those core things. Keep going on where you left off. So you and I remember the conversation of saying we could start a construction company. Kind of the rest of that is a blur because obviously I had the garbage company ProViral going on, now starting another company. We can talk about that, having too many plates, and entrepreneurs, we tend to maybe spread ourselves too thin. As I've said before, the shiny object syndrome. But go back from your perspective and keep going on your narrative.
So actually, I remembered something that happened. So I worked for this construction company for about, I think, 7 or 8 years or something. There was another employee there that I would often do side jobs with. So I'm rewinding in history a little bit from where I left off. And I remember going to him once and say, hey, we've done like 5, 6 side jobs. Why don't we just start a company, leave this one, and go out on our own? And he's like, no, that's... And the thought of being on your own and being responsible for your own money and bringing in jobs and bringing up work, you could just see overwhelmed him. Now, I should say that I did not have trust for this guy, so it would have been a terrible business partner to get in with. And I didn't really think about that at the time. I was probably 21, 22, something of that age. And I just didn't think about it. At that young age, like Andrew said, he's made a ton of mistakes when he was new in business, young and naive. Well, that would have been the same thing for me. I look back now thinking, wow, that would have been a terrible decision to go in with this guy. But the thing is, he would do work with me on the side. So we'd actually get jobs done. We'd be making a little bit of money on top of what we would make during the week. So it actually seemed pretty good. The only problem is he ended up going to jail and everything like that. So it was a good decision, or not even a decision, good that I think I had someone looking out for me that he said, no, I don't want to do that. But so I think that another term speaks to if you are a entrepreneur or not. The thought of being an entrepreneur to him, he just couldn't even, the thought, he was just, oh no.
It terrified him, basically.
Yeah.
So if just the thought of it terrifies you, then you're probably the type of person who's not born to be an entrepreneur, and you know you're not born to be an entrepreneur, and that's fantastic. I think it's good that you know that about yourself.
And I think that's good if you're you want someone for a business partner and you ask them about it and you can see that if you have to convince them to be a business partner or go into business, you can pretty much be sure that when times get rough, they will drop off. Like, nope, this isn't for me. I'm going back to my 9 to 5. And I knew a guy who was just the best trim carpenter you've ever seen. And this guy he was quiet. He always was on time. He always told the truth about anything that happened. He would have been a really great guy. And when asked, he's like, no, I just like coming in for a 9 to 5 job and go drink at the end of the night or on Friday for the weekend and then come back on Monday. He's like, I'll just do this for the rest of my life. And to me, that was a shock. I kind of always thought that everyone wanted to kind of be out on their own in time so they're not working under somebody, but I guess that's an actual mindset of somebody else. When you're young, you don't really understand anything. You learn as you grow, but not everybody wants to be out on their own. They like working for somebody else, and they have a set schedule. They know the money's coming in at the end of the week, and they're happy with that. To me, that's odd, but...
Well, there's been days, and I think all entrepreneurs experience this, where you're like, why did I do this? Life is so much easier. I go home, spend time with my family. I don't have to worry about anything. I get my paycheck, and I take the weekend off, and I go back to Monday. And so any entrepreneur I know who's gone through the struggles, and even when you're successful, when you are an entrepreneur, it never stops. It is literally a 24/7 experience. And we haven't even gotten into, and this is something you can talk far more knowledgeably about than I can, and I want to get into it today, but we haven't even talked about the personal side and the 24/7 toll that can take. Just on the business side, when you're not at work, you're at work. And it's not always a bad thing in the sense that, okay, worrying about employees depending on the industry you're in, or worrying about this job or the revenue and cash flow. Of course, you're constantly thinking about that. But as an entrepreneur, because it's your business, you want to be thinking about. You're thinking about, what should my next marketing campaign? What can I do? If you're in an industry where you're building products, in your example, in one of the businesses we own together, King's Woodshop, it's exciting to think about, okay, what next product launch should we do? How should we market it? And so your mind is constantly working, even when you're not at work. It's basically 24/7. So that's the good side but sometimes it'd be enjoyable to be able to turn your mind off. But that's the blessing and the curse of owning your own business, because you reap what you sow. And the more you spend the more time you spend thinking about your business, the more time you spend in your business, the more successful you're going to be. That correlation of 1-to-1 is not a coincidence.
Yeah, that's so I can see why the 9 to 5 would appeal to some people. One, after 5 o'clock, boom, you don't think about work at all. You don't have any more responsibilities towards work. You go home and do whatever you want for the whole weekend. Another big thing is the money is always there. When you're an entrepreneur, you have to wonder, we haven't had any jobs this week. What are we going to do for cash? We need to bring in more money. How are we going to do this? We got to, as a 9 to 5er, you don't have to come up with ideas to market your thing. And the construction company I work for, they're always like, hey, guys, we got to get more jobs coming in. And you're like, okay, go for it. I don't know. What does that mean? I just get my paycheck. But when you're an entrepreneur and it's yours, you will be up all night thinking about where this next job is going to come from. And
it's funny you say that. I just read an article the other day, and it's actually I'm trying to find the article again because I thought it was really insightful, about an individual in California, also worked at Ernst & Young, just like I have in the past. And he started 2 different apparel companies. And he determined after the second apparel company failed, this is never going to be successful until I'm forced to. So he quit his job, and he said, that's what it took. Because anytime things got really, really tough, I was making great money. I'm just like, well, yeah, that didn't work out. So he would just lean into his job, and the business failed. The third time go around, and apparel is tough. It's a really, really tough industry. I mean, all industries are tough, but apparel is particularly challenging for so many reasons. We could spend a whole episode on the apparel industry, and that's not an industry that I myself have had any experience in. But the mindset and the courage that he had to just quit and realize that's what was preventing him from being successful. So in that third business, he said, it was worse than I could imagine, but I knew I had to figure it out. I didn't have a salary job to come back to. The checks weren't coming in. The savings was dwindling or gone. I had a family to take care of. And now he's a burgeoning apparel company. And I'm hoping to have him on a podcast. And again, the name escapes me from the article because I read it a couple days ago and I didn't take note of it. But the point being is what you just talked about, that need to constantly be thinking about cash flow coming in is sometimes what it takes to be successful. And if you always have a fallback, that can often be the direct result of why any entities or businesses that you may start are going to fail. And it's the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. If you don't really need it, are you really going to invent the next wheel, or are you going to do what it takes to make it successful?
And it really takes a true entrepreneur to make that step. I think that'd be the big difference between someone who is an entrepreneur and someone who won't. Someone will think about it forever and never act on it because they're just too afraid. And that fear, you need to dispel that fear to be an entrepreneur, or just get used to it, because you'll be afraid basically all the time, especially in the early years, thinking about where things are going to come. But you're an entrepreneur if you are really willing to do whatever it takes. Quit your job because you think that that's what's holding you back. Bringing in this money is what's holding you back to grow this other company, but the other company can make way more money. So it definitely takes an entrepreneur to do that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, you think it's the other way around. Well, no, I need the money and then my business will be successful. Well, no, that was actually the hurdle. But back to your point, I appreciate so much that individual knew. He knew he didn't want to be an entrepreneur. He loved the 9-to-5 lifestyle. And I'm so thankful for those people, because all entrepreneurs would be nothing unless if you had a good mix of individuals in the world, people that wanted to just work with someone else, have the 9-to-5 job, know that the money's going to be there, and people that want to start companies and employ other people. The whole system and our economy and the world doesn't work unless if you have people of all different types. And so I have a lot of respect for someone like that who has identified, most likely through life experiences and just knowing themselves over time, that that's what was right for them. And that's not to say you might know that or say that at one point in time. And we've talked about this, people who try to be entrepreneurs and then they realize, hey, I've determined I'm not. Great, at least you tried. And then other people who don't think they're entrepreneurs and eventually they try and then they realize, yeah, this is for me. And I've always said the 4 different types of people, the one that is the saddest to me are the people who truly are born to be entrepreneurs, but they never trust themselves. They never get past that fear to try it, so they never discover that. And that's why this podcast exists, to help for those of you who have that wall and know you're an entrepreneur, talking about these things and some of the struggles we went through. It is scary, but we've done it. Many people have done it. You can do it too.
I think for being an entrepreneur, there's a lot of fallacies about being an entrepreneur. You start your own company, and I'm sure you get you'll say, oh yeah, I run a construction. Oh, you're rich. Oh, I'm like, did you not hear me? I said I own the company. I'm dirt poor. I wonder where money's going to come from is what it is. So some people get this idea that you own your own company, boom, all of a sudden you're a millionaire, and that's the way it is. But it is so opposite of that. But it's even more than that. I don't think people understand what being an entrepreneur is like, and that might be what stops people, or it might be what causes people to jump in. People who think you're instantly rich for starting your own company, I think there's a lot of people who jump into that, see how hard it is, and then give up and fail because they're not true entrepreneurs. I remember going through a drive-thru at a coffee shop, and I don't even know how I talked to the lady about it, but
was this back in Wisconsin or here in Arizona?
This was here in Arizona. It was actually a few weeks ago. The lady's like, "Oh, you got the weekend doing anything fun off?" I'm like, "No, I work every day." And she's like, "Every day?" I'm like, "Yes, every day." She's like, "You don't get a day off?" I said, "No, I don't take days off." And she could not comprehend what that really meant.
Did she know you own the company?
No, she didn't know.
So that's
basically from a hole in the wall. But to me, that says, okay, this person doesn't seem like they'd be an entrepreneur. If they can't imagine working every single day. And the reason entrepreneurs work so hard every day is that so they can get to a point where they don't have to work every day, where they could take a week off and not have to worry about it. But believe me, that takes a long time.
Well, and there's no guarantee of that. I mean, there's no guarantee of that whatsoever. And I think, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she assumed you work for someone and they never gave you a day off. Because if I heard that, I'd be like, oh, you must be a business owner. Oh, yeah. How did you know? Well, because you work every single day. But so obviously we've talked, the fallacies of being a business owner. We've talked a lot about the society. You watch a documentary and in 60 minutes, people go from rags to riches. And I think if you talk with anybody that's experienced, that's of course not the case. But then on the other side, there's a lot of hardships. You and I were coming back from a job today that we were doing for one of the other companies that we own, a construction company here in Arizona. And we said, look at the freedom that we have. We can go to lunch if we want to, and we can spend a little bit longer because it's a Friday and take some time and talk about whatever we want to talk about. And so just like anything, there are pros and cons. And while you might not have a 9-to-5 job and you have a 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. job 24/7, you do have sometimes a little bit more flexibility than you otherwise would. Now, what comes with that flexibility is, of course, a tremendous weight of responsibility, especially when finances are tight and, the revenue's not coming in like you want it to. But I think and I guess that's one of the fallacies people have about entrepreneurship is, you can go on vacation whenever you want. You can, you're rich. You can go on vacation. You control your schedule. Well, the reality of the situation is all of those things aren't true. But what is true is you do have more flexibility than you may otherwise have, depending on the day and depending on the industry, of course.
But even with that flexibility, you take a vacation for a week, let's say you're blessed with the opportunity, you cannot stop thinking about your business. Whereas 9 to 5, you would never put one thought of your life at work in your vacation. Whereas you're on vacation, you're thinking, okay, I got to do this when I get back. I got to do this. And it's so hard as an entrepreneur to turn your mind off, to stop thinking about the business for 5 minutes. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I think it's a mixture of both, because that's the thing. You actually have to train your brain to turn it off, because the most successful entrepreneurs take time away from their business and they take time to think. And outside, whether they read fiction books or what have you. So you actually have to train your brain. If you're going to go on vacation, take a vacation, because I believe that you come back fully recharged. And I know that this is the case, but really a vacation does seem more like a nuisance until when you get on it, if you've experienced enough how important being able to recharge the battery is when you're an entrepreneur. So to your point, it's a blessing and a curse, I think.
Yeah, there's so many thoughts going in my mind just with this discussion. Actually, we were talking earlier, you think about your business all the time and you strive to make it better, make it grow. And then when you start getting a little traction, it is so fulfilling in a way that you can't get from anything else. You will never, I shouldn't say, some people might, but I would never feel fulfilled in a 9-to-5. Imagine you did something great in that job. Well, you're really doing it for somebody else. They're getting the money. If they're getting the success, they're getting, and not that I want fame or success or money, but seeing a company grow that you built, that things are happening, you're a part of it. It is so fulfilling in a way that I don't think I could have ever gotten, and I don't think most people can get out of a regular 9-to-5 job working for the man.
Yeah, it's a completely different fulfilling. When I was in the financial services industry, and I was a relationship manager working with big companies, and obviously you're helping them with lending. Because I was also an entrepreneur and running a business outside of that, I was able to connect with them on a different level that a lot of my colleagues weren't necessarily able to connect with. But I will say it was very fulfilling and satisfying as an entrepreneur myself, being able to connect and help other entrepreneurs be successful, even though I was working for someone else. And I guess I was excited for the organization, BMO, that I was working for, but I was more fulfilled and excited to see this entrepreneur, to be able to help the entrepreneur. So to your point, it wasn't necessarily the organization. Very, very thankful for everything that I was given by BMO Harris Bank. I think they've now rebranded to just BMO, but the real excitement there, to your point, was seeing other entrepreneurs and helping them be successful. So what I'm saying is you can have a high degree of feeling success when you're working in the corporate world or working for someone else, but it's a completely different feeling than you working tirelessly, making so many of the sacrifices that are required to be successful and a successful entrepreneur, and then seeing, as you said, maybe an idea gain traction and providing something, whether it's a good or a service, to people, and seeing the smile on the face. I think the best example you and I have is when you build a new house for someone. That's a perfect example of then you see them and they find their home. And you look at it and say, we built that. Our team built that together. And you see how much happiness that gives someone. That's the feeling that you can't get, I don't believe, unless if it's your company and you're the entrepreneur there.
Yeah, building a new home for someone, it is like the project goes on for a long time. And it is just a wonderful feeling for them to, now people walk through the houses a lot and see it in different stages, but when they finally get it and they're looking at this, is just so beautiful. It is the greatest feeling in the world. Like, yes, we did that. And actually working for a construction company, working for somebody else, you actually never get to see that because you build it. But then when the owner comes, you're long gone. The owners of the company see it and like, oh, great. And to them, sometimes it might just be, yes, we just get another paycheck. So we got another customer. That's great because they didn't actually build it. I don't know if that's the case. I've never been around now that I think of it when the owners have come into anything we've built. But as the owner of the company, you do get to see it and you get to see the customers look on their face when they're so happy. I imagine if you're in a clothing industry like you were talking about, you probably see it all the time. Not you personally, but every day a customer comes in, oh, I love that. Oh, I love this look. And they buy it and they go out happy. You get that fulfillment every day. Yeah, in my industry, it's a little harder. Projects take so long for the most part, but yeah, it is just, I'm almost building at that point just for that end goal, to see the look on their face, see how happy they are. And that's just not something you could do if you're working for somebody else.
Yeah, the other side of that coin is when you build a house, and of course, so many things are subjective. When you're selling a good, there's going to be people that love it, and there's going to be people that hate it. You have to be sure that when someone walks through your house and says, "I remember someone walked through and they made some comment, oh, this thing is junk," or "Yeah, I hate this layout," or whatever it is. And that's one industry where you really learn to get thick skin, because obviously everybody has their preferences about their home, and the world is full of 8 billion people, so we all like different things and different layouts and have different life situations and different home styles, and tastes and features work well differently. Or well for some people and not for others. So that's one of the scenarios where someone walks through and say, "Oh, I hate this house." You have to say, your immediate thought is, "What did I do wrong?" No,
it's a terrible feeling.
It is a bad feeling, but you do have to learn, depending on the industry, and really any industry, particularly the goods industry. If you're selling goods, hey, not everybody's going to love it, and not everybody's going to hate it. And usually if you have a good mix of people on both sides, you've probably done something right. Now, that's not to say if you do shoddy work and it legitimately is poor, well, you should feel bad if someone says that's garbage because you're doing shoddy work. But we focus on quality and customer service. And if those are not just words that you say for placation, but they're actually how you live and the culture within your company, then you can take people's opinions, in particular as it relates to a house, with a grain of salt.
Well, yeah, and you have to always remember, like the saying, you can please some of the people some of the time, but you can't please all the people all the time. So being an entrepreneur really means you have to be thick-skinned. And being an entrepreneur, you have emotions you never knew you had. You will feel every range of emotion. You'll be super happy, and then, like you said, someone will walk in, what in the world? Is this guy first day on the job or something? This is terrible. And like you said, you start internalizing it. Well, you really can't, because one, if anybody who's been on social media knows, sometimes people can be mean just to be mean, but sometimes you have a really great product that they really just don't like, and you have to get used to rejection. It will happen. I don't care what industry you are in. It will happen. I mean, even in garbage, I remember you had some lady just calling up 50 times, like, "Okay, well, we're not going to work out. We'll have to let you go." "Oh no, well, I didn't mean that." And it's just like, people will find a reason to hate what you do. You really got to be thick-skinned. And yeah, like you said, take it with a grain of salt. You're not going to make everybody happy all the time, regardless of how great your work is.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, and something, we both grew up with a religious background and a solid moral foundation. You have to be able to, at the end of every day, look your family in the eye, look yourself in the eye in the mirror, and be able to say, I did the best I could, and I either made a mistake and I'm going to correct it, or you know what, that person just, again, we're focusing on one person's opinion, but the point of the matter is if you can go home every single day and you can know that you did your best work, you treated people the way you would want to be treated, and you conducted your business in a manner that you would want other people to conduct their business towards you, and for us in a God-pleasing manner, then you need to grow the thick skin, because you know you did the right thing. Now, we're all human and we all make mistakes, and sometimes when you go home and you feel a little bit sick about something, maybe a conversation you had, or maybe the way you treated a customer because you were having a bad day, that should be your first clue. Okay, you did do something wrong. You don't kill yourself for it. Learn from it. Try not to repeat it.
Yeah, and don't forget to admit when you make a mistake. Everybody does. This society, for whatever reason, they are so quick to point the finger at everybody else. No, they did something wrong. And people, as an entrepreneur, we should be, that was my fault. Let me correct it. Let me get it done. Let me make it right. But now these days, like, no, that'll cost me more money. I don't want to do it. I want my business to make money. I'm just going to let them suffer. I'm going to point the finger at somebody else. That's not the kind of entrepreneurs that we should strive to be, I don't think.
Yeah, and that's human nature. I mean, I think it's hard for all of us to say I'm sorry, especially in this day and age. It's, you see some politicians, they get crucified. They think they're going to get crucified for just saying I'm sorry, when actually just saying, you know what, I made a mistake and I'm sorry, I'm human, is the best approach to take. Now, we've gone over so many different concepts, and this is how it's going to be. And this is why we're going to have multiple podcasts, the Holland Brothers Series, if you will, on the Andrew Holland podcast, because we get into such a good range of things. One of the things we haven't talked about is, so you're married with 5 kids, my nieces and nephews, uncle, the best spot to be in, and talk about being an entrepreneur, being young, and also having a family. That's tough, really tough. And don't go way into the details, but just because we'll be here till 5 years from now. But for those who are thinking about starting a business and they are maybe young and already have a family, or they're older and they have a family and they say, well, I can't start a business because I have a family. Give them some advice or insight that sets them up, number one, to have an honest conversation with their spouse and with their family, depending on the kids' ages, whether they're out of the house or, if they're really tiny, obviously, they're not going to have a conversation with them. But all of the people around you that you can have to make them prepared or help them get prepared so that the probability of success for you is as high as it can be.
Boy, that's really hard. So if you're single and you want to start a business, I would definitely say start a business while you're single. And in the early years, don't go looking for a relationship. Now, if you're starting a business, you probably don't have a whole lot of time to do that. The quickest way to lose friends a lot of times is to start a business because they can't understand when you can't go out every single night and do stuff. But now, let's say you're in a relationship, dating or married, it's kind of going to be the same thing. Something has to give. You can't give, it really can't be 50-50. Your attention span to your business and to your spouse or your significant other, what do they say these days? Because your business needs 99% of your attention, especially in their early days.
Yeah.
And you really have to look, being single, the decision is easy whether you're able to start it based on your own feelings because you know you. Now you have somebody else, you really have to ask yourself, and at them, you can ask them, but you should know them by now, will they be supportive of me if I'm not around 90% of the time? And I can say firsthand that being married, I think at the time I had maybe 3 kids when we started.
How old were you?
Maybe 22.
Yeah, I think you were.
It caused some really hard marital problems because basically my wife would have to take care of 99% of the household stuff, the kids. And
you had twins.
Yeah.
I mean, so not only are you 22, starting a business, helping Jeff and I in our business a tremendous amount, but now we're going to start the construction company because you're sick of working for someone else, and you have 3 kids and twins, no less.
Yeah.
And I remember you always say, when one cries, the other one's happy, and just when you get the other one happy, the other one starts crying, and one poops their diaper, and you get them taken care of. Then the other one decides to poop their diaper, and basically you get no break.
Yep. So, and we had one, and then a year and 10 days later we had twins. So basically we had 3 kids, 1 and under. So, and really, my wife did 99% of the work there, and she was really great at it, but it did cause a huge strain in the relationship, not only because she did a lot of the work, but because I wasn't around a lot. And women don't really like that when you're not around and not always there to show them loving and take them on dates every other night or whatever. So it really caused some hard times. So then you're going to decide, well, do I kind of let the relationship fail or do I let the business fail? And you're going to get caught in between. And it just adds to the already compounding stress that a business can give you. So a relationship, think of how stressful it is. Anybody who's been in one or lost a relationship and how heartfelt problems that added. A business is even worse. And not only that, but you can lose someone and the business at the same time, and now you have nothing. So I would definitely not suggest starting a new relationship and a business at the same time, or if you're very new to a relationship, starting a business, because something will give. Now, we had been married for, I don't know, 5-6 years or something.
Not at 22. You'd been married for 4 years.
So I was 18.
Yeah.
So
But that's such a tough, just from my perspective, I had relationships throughout the business. I'm single, and a big part of that is because I've done so much. I've seen some of the strain that it causes, but I've done so many businesses, some for the better and some for the worse. But I'm a big believer, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but I believe it's really, really challenging, and only a few people successfully accomplish being wildly successful in their professional life and wildly successful in their personal life. Because and there are some people, but look at most of the billionaires. How many times have they been divorced? How many relationships have they had that haven't gone well? Millionaires, billionaires. And it is because it takes a lot of, there's only 24 hours in the day. And so one of my favorite quotes is from Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric. He said, "There's no such thing as a work-life balance. There are work-life choices." And that is so true. There are work-life choices. And I think one of the things that you bring up is, and we've talked briefly about this, but we can go in more depth. It's challenging because you don't even know what to expect with entrepreneurship. And now you're asking your spouse or your significant other, are you going to be on this journey with me? Are you going to support me through thick and thin? And it's easy to say yes because you both have an idea of what it's going to be. But the real thing is,
you're like a naive little kid. You don't know what to expect. You don't know how bad it's going to get. And my philosophy, it was probably not a good one. Mine was like, I can always fix a relationship. I'm pretty good at that. Let me focus on the business, grow that, and then maybe I can use that to kind of fix the relationship. Look, we're making all this money. Look, see? And maybe that wasn't the best. Now, we did work it through. I won't lie and say everything's 100% perfect. There is some permanent damage from that. But
anybody that says their relationship is 100% perfect is lying to you. I promise you.
Yep. And it's just like an entrepreneur. You look at that, oh, they own their business. They must be rich. They got free time. Same thing in relationship. You see a relationship, oh, they're just perfect. Why can't we be like that? Trust me. They look perfect. People look perfect, especially when they're new. Nobody's perfect. No relationship is perfect. There's always some troubles. But being an entrepreneur certainly adds more hardships. But yeah, I like that when I said you could ask your significant other, will they support you? And the easy answer is, oh, yes, I'm there for you 100%. Everyone's like, oh, I love you. Of course, I'll do anything. But then when the hard times come, and it's like having a business partner, the hard times come that you've never foreseen before, and they're like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be part of this. And the same thing can happen in a relationship. An entrepreneur is basically like a relationship that it has ups and downs and twists, except now you have basically your whole life on the line with entrepreneur. No money, no place to live because you can't afford anything.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, I regret because I missed so much of my nieces and nephews' early days, and I know you did too because of the entrepreneurship, and you can't get those back. As a matter of fact, the other day we were just watching videos of them in a YouTube video. They're just so dang cute, and now they grow up, and they're 14 and 2 13-year-olds and 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, but just we've talked about being young. You're inherently naive because you haven't experienced life. Me right here, obviously you. Now you're in a relationship. You're married. That just by itself is complicated. Now you had kids. That by itself adds another complication. And then you and I are males, obviously, and we don't really develop. Some women would say ever, but we don't really mature until 20,
we'll let you know when it happens.
Yeah, 27, 28, 29, 30, it's a range. And so you don't even know who you are, and you don't even know how you're going to deal with it. My point is one of the things you said that made me think you can go into a business partnership, and when you go in at a young age,
gung-ho.
Well, when you go in at any age, until you actually experience some of the challenges, you really sometimes don't know how you or your business partner is going to react, because how can you possibly know how you're going to react to something that you couldn't have possibly fathomed being as challenging as it is? And usually, just like in marriages, finances can create a huge strain. I don't know what the statistic is, but they say the number one reason people get divorced in marriages these days is because of finances. 80% or what have you. Well, a business relationship is basically a marriage, but with all the benefits. Now, of course, unless if a husband and a wife are in business together.
That is
But
even worse.
well, I can't even imagine that. So, you kind of had the worst world in the sense of young relationship, family, a lot of kids, now entrepreneurship. And as I've said in the past, we didn't come from money by any stretch of the imagination. Jeff, my business partner, Proviro, hadn't come from money, and we started the company on credit card debt, which was a whole another beast and monster unto itself. And you kind of set yourself up for one of the most trying, challenging times. And the reason I say that is you can provide so much wisdom and advice, because you basically said, I'm going to put myself in the worst possible scenario to be successful. And here you are today. And like you said, obviously there's always, there's some nicks, or you said permanent damage. I think that's just part of growing up. There's always things you wish you could have changed or things you would have done differently. That's life. I mean, that's part of maturing. And could I go back and not say some things, or, treated my business partner differently in a certain way than I wish I would have, which has a lasting impact on how they view you. And as we know, a goodwill jar, it takes a long time to build up that goodwill jar, but one bad incident, boom, it's gone. And so I think it's, at least for me, and I think for most people, it's really encouraging to know. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is you can provide a lot of advice to a lot of people that maybe they don't have all of those things against them. But if anybody can provide advice or wisdom on, okay, don't do this, or think about doing this, or do this, or especially that cross between the personal and business, you're a perfect example of someone that can. So kind of going back to that, what I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if you're single, stay single, start your business, let it get a little bit successful, where you have some more freedom, and then you can think about going into a relationship. If you're already in a relationship, either are you saying don't start a business, or are you saying make sure that you have that conversation, you have as much support as anybody can give, not knowing what's about to happen, because you can't know what being in business and being an entrepreneur until you've done it. You just simply can't.
See, and it helps being in a relationship for a longer period of time, because then you really get to know the person.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I did by any means, because there's so many situations that you can't understand. And the problem is your spouse, like mine was my means of support when I had a hard day, when things were going right. You talk and you work it out. But then when the business is going wrong, and then the family is going wrong, and if you work 9 to 5 and let's say you get laid off, you're like, oh, no money? No, I still get unemployment. Well, if you don't have money coming in your business, you have no money coming in anywhere. So it really causes strain. So now I'm in my marriage, it's having trouble. You have a business having trouble, and then your spouse says, what are you even doing here? No money is coming in. You're never around. I mean, what in the world is going on? So it adds another complex strain on your body. Like, is this business a good idea? What is going on? I am not making any money, and my marriage is dying. So you have to have the mental fortitude to be able to get over that. And your spouse, it's almost harder for them because they can't see your vision. You can try to tell them, and I think it's really hard, especially in this world, to have someone who will stick by you when it gets so bad like that. When we're worried about, well, we have kids, we got to feed them. What are we going to do? We're not making any money. We're going to end up losing our house. And all that happened. And we ended up getting over it. Work starts coming, things start happening, but you got to keep going. As an entrepreneur, if you give up when your first hard thing comes there, or something that's really hard comes along, well, you will always fail, because it's never going to be easy. It's never you're going to go out there and also make it rich and make billions. And I remember watching that show. He was talking about this was I think the Titans that built America was what it was called. And
You guys know that the documentary I always talk about, and
Yeah,
everybody around me actually, yeah.
if we don't watch it, he'll come in. Have you watched that yet? Have you yet to watch it? So I think it was Pierre DuPont. He was in his dad's business, and his dad ended up dying, and his uncle just stole it right from him. And he started all the way back down at the bottom, no money, no job, no anything. And what did he do? He worked up his own business, started up, got money, got so big where he bought the company back from his uncle, and he was on top again. So, I mean, he probably had it harder than any of us would. Dad dying right when he was in the middle of a business, and then someone stealing the company from him right from under his feet.
Not just someone, his uncle.
Yeah, I mean, and yet he can still make it. So as an entrepreneur, relationships are so hard, but you have to understand, and I don't know if you can, empirical knowledge and all, how hard it will be if your business starts failing and you're in a relationship. Something will give, and in my case, both gave, and it became really hard to make that work. But everything is basically possible if you really try hard and keep trying. Persevere through the hard times. You will need to eventually, being an entrepreneur. You will always have hard times. And now, where we are now, I did miss a lot of my kids' younger age things that happened in school. But the good part is, it was at an age that they won't remember that I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But now they're at an age where, oh, Dad, can you come to this? I got this. Oh, I have this tomorrow. I have this the next day. I'm like, sure, I'll come. I can take off a couple hours from work because I don't have to ask anybody, hey, can I go take off? And now at my age where my kids are asking me to come, not just because I'm there because I'm their parent or social pressures, it's the child actually wants me to be there. They will remember me being there or not being there because, trust me, they will let you know when you miss something. That is one of the greatest things about being an entrepreneur, that you can take the time if you try for a long period of time, start to build something up. And I'm not saying it's going to happen in the first year. That's why don't do what I did and have kids and a wife and everything right at the beginning of your business, because that will be terrible. But over time, you will have the luxury of taking the time off more than a 9-to-5er would. And so there are, like we've been saying, pros and cons to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I think the one of the key takeaways from that is, well, I mean, you just talked about the flexibility, but, well, I forgot what I was going to say.
Happens to all of us.
But I guess the point is grit and perseverance. Oh, I remember. So much of success or not giving up is from, and again, talking secularly here, because we have nothing, all of the strengths and gifts we have are from God, but so much of the ability, the mental fortitude to move through is just that, up here. It's in the head. I mean, it is. I remember, so I tell this story frequently, and you've probably heard it, but I remember year 2 or 3 of the business, going home. I don't remember a lot of things, as I said earlier. I remember exactly where I lived. I remember exactly what my apartment looked like. I remember exactly where my bed was. I remember that night almost to a T, because going home, getting home at about 11:45 p.m., one of the trucks had broken down. We had payroll the next day, either the next day or the next day, and we had no money to pay it. And I had no idea how we were going to get through this. It had just been a terrible day. And I don't remember if it was winter, but winter usually made days even 50 times worse. And I just sat in my bed and I basically cried. I wasn't a grown man, 23 or 24, still a young kid, but we'll just say a man crying, because I just, you basically are brought to the very bottom. And what I realized then is, from that point on, I think because I was so afraid of bankruptcy and all the societal pressure of what it's like to fail, and I had never failed before, and I was so afraid of failing, and I was at the very brink of failing. And so I just, cried, and then I realized they can't take my faith, they can't take my family, they can't take really anything that's important to me. And so if I go bankrupt, oh, wow.
And boy, and once you get comfortable with, yeah, I might go bankrupt, I might lose everything. It is actually very empowering. Well, you're at the bottom. The only place I can go is up. I can't get any worse than this.
Well, that's exactly once I acknowledged that and I was okay with it, I felt like a 5-ton brick had been taken off my shoulders. And it's not a feeling I could ever describe to someone with any seriousness to make you actually feel it, unless if you experience it yourself. I don't remember how we got through it, but we did. And from that, I just remember in that point in the business, there was just a whole, kind of like Paul when the scales dropped from his eyes when he was blind in Acts chapter 9. My whole vision and the light just moving forward. I made better decisions. I mean, once I just accepted it's okay to fail, it's like, it is incredible. And so that's something that I needed. And I think most entrepreneurs, especially in this society where all we tout and all we see is the successful people and all the successes, and we feel like, well, they were successful, or how can that person be successful and I'm failing? And basically 80% of people fail. You just don't hear about it. I don't know what the number is, but the statistics is in the first year, 60% of businesses fail. By the second or third year, it's another 60% or whatever the numbers are. You can look them up, and you don't hear about those. So it's kind of all of the societal pressures or everything we read are really the opposite to what reality is. But once you just acknowledge that and accept it, oh, it's such a motivating and powerful feeling. And it's a lot easier, getting back to the very original point of what we were talking about, to have the mental fortitude to get through any situation and know, okay, this is terrible. We're going to get through it. And sometimes you do fail. Oh, I mean, I've talked about, you've seen my failures, you've had failures, everybody fails. And the only way you be successful is having failures. And so this idea of, having mental fortitude isn't being an unrealistic, optimistic lying to yourself, but it's giving yourself the willpower to get through even the toughest of situations.
Well, yeah, and with social media now, people are afraid to try something that they might fail into. Not because of I don't think it's the fact that they're failing. I think it's the fact that the world is now seeing them fail. And don't let that hold you back. Don't let the fear of other people seeing you fail, because, yeah, you may fail now, but then you can rise above the stars with just trekking on and keep going and persevering. And then now these people who laughed at you because you failed are way down there and you're way up here. You're reaching your potential. You're doing what you love. And I know you said in one of your podcasts is people say, do what you love, you won't work a day in your life or whatever, and you kind of shot that down. But
well, yeah, I mean, I think to the point of what you were talking about, I forgot what episode it is, but everybody says do what you love. Well, sometimes you have to do what you hate to earn the ability and the capability to do what you love. And that's why I've always had a beef with that saying, because I think you can do what you love, but you have to go through some real tumultuous periods and sometimes start somewhere else, get successful in it, and then that will be the launch pad upon which you can actually work to do what you love.
I think whoever came up with that saying was working a 9-to-5 job, and that they were saying under somebody else, if you do what you love, you'll never work, because as an entrepreneur, like you were saying, you will do stuff you hate. It will never be just what you love until you get big enough to pay somebody else to do it, because you're going to have to do the taxes. You're going to have to see new business. How much do I owe the government? Oh my goodness. And then taxes and all the accounting, meeting with customer, when all I wanted to do was build this little product. Isn't that what I do? Build it. The world comes and I sell it. Isn't that what they tell us? Well, if only it worked that way. You build it, but now you got to market it and sell it. And oh, look, there's 1,500 other people doing that same product. So now you got to find a better marketing strategy. So you will do things that you hate. So I think that's where that saying came from, was someone who was working a 9-to-5 job, because they were only doing what they loved.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because what you just described is, multifaceted. No human on this earth has all the skills to be successful in business by themselves. All of them. They cannot do it without a team. But oftentimes, especially early on, when you don't have the luxury of having people being able to specialize, whether it's in, depending on the industry, let's just say accounts payable, accounts receivable, and then on the operations side, strategic thinking, whatever, you're the only one that can do all of those things. You've got people helping you out, but they have specific tasks and responsibilities to make the business operationally work. And so you have to learn very quickly that you've got to be multifaceted. And I don't think that actually ever really changes. I think as you grow, you get the opportunity to focus more strategically and maybe be less involved in the day-to-day operations, although that's a caution there, because a lot of companies, I believe that the CEOs sit in their golden ivory towers and they forget what happens in the day-to-day, and they make decisions that they're absolutely clueless about, and they don't talk to the people that are actually making the company work and run, and don't realize that the decision that they just made is completely
detrimental to everything else.
Yeah.
Well, and then you have the people who are on the other side. So let's say they hated all this stuff, but then they got so used to doing it. Now it comes time to pass it off to somebody else, and they don't know how to quite give them the whole torch. They want to hold on to it, and they become a micromanager. Now they're trying to manage everything. Even though they're not doing it, they want to make sure you do it exactly how you did it because you got so used to doing it.
That's a good point, because I'm a type A personality where I tend to like to have control. And that was a tough part for me as we grew in the garbage company. It's still a tough part, giving up some of that control. But the reality of the situation is two things. Number one, in order to be successful, grow your company, be able to employ more people, and create the culture that you want, if your goal is to grow and grow relatively large, you're going to have to get comfortable with that. And number two, part of the reason, and this was a big probably learning curve for me, especially being young, maybe being a little bit over arrogant, is you think your way is the best way. Well, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And it took me a while to, number one, get comfortable passing it off. And of course, you don't just hire someone and then pass it off. You've got to build that trust, like in any relationship, business or personal. But as you build that trust and they show that they can be trusted, be comfortable passing it off. And they're going to make mistakes, but that's okay. As long as they're not making the same mistakes over. You make mistakes too. But then number two, empower them to come up with their own ideas or do it their way. And what I found is most of the time when I do that, they come up with a better, more efficient way than I was doing it originally. And I look like a complete buffoon when I said, well, no, do it this way. And they come up with something that's completely different, which sometimes we don't like as humans, but it's better. And so I've gotten into the habit of, and I think the best companies with the best cultures recognize this is how we're doing it now. We have a very open, honest culture. If you see something and you think there's a different way to do it, please let us know. And I always tell, I just hired another employee for one of our companies the other day. I always say, that doesn't mean we're going to do everything you say, but I want you to know that your ideas and your suggestions are not only are they welcome, they're expected. I want you to see things, especially people that are working for you in the same industry, and maybe they've had experience in another company in the same industry. That's a beautiful thing when they've seen how other companies in the same industry who are successful have operated. They can come to your business and say, well, we used to do it, we did it this way. And I actually had an employee that I hired, I don't know, probably 5 weeks ago, who worked this was for the coffee and the bike shop, worked at a coffee and bike shop, a different one, come up with a suggestion and say, well, we did it here, we did it like this. And I'm like, I really like that idea. And right there on the spot, we implemented it because it was a good idea. It made sense. And it improved the process. And I think that's number one. I think empowering people around you and in your companies is so important. Back to your point, if you're working for a yes man, run, get out of there, because it's going to implode, or it's not going to go to the full potential.
Culture. We're back at culture again. Why? Because it is so critical in your business to monitor culture. When I worked for that construction company, they did not like anyone asking why. I remember I was actually hauled into the office one day. They called me to come down to the office. We got to talk to you. I'm like, completely oblivious, because I'm like, well, I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything to anybody. I don't know what's going on. And the VP of the company came in, and he's like, I got to talk to you. I've been hearing from all the foremans that you just keep asking why. And I was like, yeah? He's like, well, they're sounding like you're talking back to him. Like, I'm not a talker backer kind of person. I said, but I do need to understand why we do something a certain way. And if I give them a suggestion, they'd be like, no, we're not doing that. Well, why can we not do it this way? Because what happened was we'd have such inefficient ways of doing things because the culture bred, do it this way, there is no other way, don't ask questions. So now we do it like that, and this can happen to any business. If this is the culture you breed, your business will stagnate. And at this company, after I left, just went downhill, and it wasn't until they basically got rid of all their top guys, got in fresh people who could now come up with ideas. And so essentially what did they do? They changed their culture. And it's hard to change people that have been so set in that company's culture. Sometimes you just got to let them go and get new ones to start afresh. But once their culture changed and people started, they liked getting new ideas, that company started exploding. I mean, it was probably maybe 10 years later, but once they realized, okay, our culture is killing us, and it was, you're going to haul somebody in because they need to understand, not only is it important to come up with new ideas, but for someone to understand why they're doing something really help alleviates mistakes in the future, because they might think to themselves, as I did, well, I'll just do it like this because what's the point of doing that, only to find out why, oh, that's why we don't do it that way. But if they had a good reason, they would understand it helps solves problems if people understand why. And they never liked new ideas. The answer was no, just do it this way. I heard that so much. And no, you don't need a reason. That is such a terrible culture to have in any company. You really need to listen to your employees. And sometimes you, as an owner, you can get a fat head and think, no, I know everything. I know how ways. And you get somebody younger. What do you know? You've only been doing it for a month now. But the problem with doing it for a long time is you tend to stop thinking of new ways to do things because you don't need to. You've been doing this way. It's been working. But there could be a brand new way that you're not thinking of because you've done it so long, you're stuck in a rut, that this new guy comes along with, can save you 20% on your time, and you won't listen to it because, no, we're doing it the way I want it to. Don't let that happen to you. Always treat employees like they're an actual somebody with a thought, and stop looking at them like you're down there, you're going to listen to me. There's a fine line. You don't want to be friends with your employees because that makes them want to try to take advantage of you. But you also,
not all of them, but
it can happen.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, I remember working for a guy who, I never eat lunch with the employees. They're down there, and we got to keep that separate. That's the wrong way. That's the wrong approach. There is middle ground there somewhere. And the thing is, too, when you become too friendly with them, sometimes when it comes time for a reprimanding or something that happens, you don't really want to do it. And sometimes it might stop you from doing it when you need to. So, but there is definitely a fine line. And you have to figure out what that is. There's no good definition, how friendly you need to be, but don't be that guy who's like, no, you're going to do how I say. And that breeds terrible culture, because now I feel like, well, I'm not even important. They could get a monkey to do my job because they're just going to do whatever they tell them to do. And you could have the best employee in the world who now feels degraded and is just going to become part of the cog of the machine, when you could have made a whole new machine with this employee, and you're really killing their spirit.
Well, yeah, I don't think you get to see the real value that other humans provide if you have a culture that's that claustrophobic, if you will, or that dictatorial. And you can bet if you're like that, your competition is different, or whoever your competition is, if they are different, and they're going to run miles around you. So not only is it just a terrible culture to exhibit because from a human perspective, but from a business perspective, you're going to lose. I can't think of an example off the top of my head right now, but I've watched so many documentaries where one company was so ingrained in what they did, and their competitor said, you know what? Let's listen to some of the new people who have new ideas and suggest we do it a different way. They do it a different way, and then they just blow by their competitor. And the competitor's like, oh, what are we doing? And then they try to blame the employees. Well, no, it's actually, your fault. There's a reason the saying is the buck stops here at the top, because you're the one that's responsible for the culture, and you're the one that wasn't open and to people giving ideas and suggestions. And it's not like at that company you were saying, well, why do I have to do this? Or why are we got to do this? You weren't being disrespectful. You're saying, oh, okay. Do you mind telling me why do we do this? Because number one, if you know why you're doing something, you remember it.
Yep.
And number two, if you know why you're doing something, you're going to be less likely to make a mistake and do it a different way if you were in the habit of doing it a different way, if you have some rationality behind it. And for me, I've gotten really comfortable, especially, I always love bringing in new employees for so many reasons. And we brought some new ones, as I just talked about in our coffee and bike shop. And I love getting the question, why? Or why do we do this? And there's been a lot of times I have to say, that's a good question. I actually don't know why we do that. So if you can think of a better way, or let me know. And I don't have a specific example off the top of my head, but I know that just happened the other day. And so if someone asks you why and you don't have a legitimate reason, don't just make something up to make it seem like, well, I'm the owner, so I know what's going on here.
Yep.
Just be honest. If you don't know, say, that's a really good question. I don't know why we do it that way, but I know it's working. But if you come up with something else that you think is more efficient or can improve the customer experience or improve the quality of the product, please bring your suggestions to us so we can talk about those things. And I think that's something that it's just, I see that less and less in the culture of so many companies. And I believe that impacts every facet of the business: customer service, quality of your product, strategic growth. I could go on and on. Employee satisfaction, employee retention, just everything. I think that culture, again, it really just comes down to culture.
Yeah, and with this good culture, having employees that actually feel like they're being listened to. I have been told by multiple employees, you are the best boss I ever had. And they said, you're actually willing, it's like you care what we say. You don't just, okay, get back to work. And so what does that do for me? It makes them want to show up on time for me and work hard for me because they like coming to work. You breed that great culture, and it's not just about just listening to the employee, but making the employee happy, which in turn makes them want to work harder at your business, which then your business grows. So it's like he always says, employees are everything to a business. The business would go nowhere without an employee. I mean, you can do great by yourself, but you are so limited with one person. You start bringing on a team and bringing on employees, you can go so much farther, so much faster. But if your culture is terrible, it doesn't matter how many people you bring on, your business is just going to start tanking because no one's happy, people start leaving, and now you're spending more in training new employees because you can't keep them for very long, that you can never get any new ideas because you keep resetting. It's like a little company reset. Whereas if you had good culture and people love showing up to work every day, like I do, I work every day, and yet I never feel like, I got to work today. Now, it is my company, but my employees were always showing up on time, early. And I remember working for the company where they hated when people asked why. I'm like, well, I'm fine. I'm sick of this place. I'm going to show up at 7 o'clock right when they start paying me, and I'm going to leave right at 3:30 when I'm done, and that's it. And and that's the wrong feeling to have, but that is what happens when you're working with people who don't care. It's clear they don't care about what you have to say. As long as you go there and do your work, like, fine, I'm just going to come here and work, and it becomes about a paycheck. And that is so prevalent in society. People now are only working. They only care about that paycheck. They don't care about the work they do. They don't care about the company. They don't care about the product that they're selling or the customers or anything. They just care about the paycheck. And that is all culture.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, there are some, you will have rotten apples that no matter how great you treat them, they'll only try to use you, take stuff from you. But apart from the outliers, it's all about culture. And if they love coming to work and they love you as a boss, they will love working for you. And I'll stay an extra 5 minutes. You will not get that if you're the boss says, no, we don't care what you say. Don't be like that.
Yeah, and I think as we talk, it doesn't seem that hard. Sometimes the theoretical is a lot easier than the practical, especially in the day-to-day volatility of all of us as humans and our emotions, and when you mix personal and business, and everybody has good days and bad days. But at the end of the day, it really just comes down to treating other humans like humans. It's actually that simple. One of the things, if you want to figure out how your company is doing from a culture perspective, I would encourage you to do a blind survey and ask one question. Do you feel like a value, trusted human being in this organization? I think that's the only question you need. And that question, and I'm simplifying it, I would obviously ask a lot more questions to get a lot more insight. But I really think it just comes down to when people feel like you actually care about them as a human being, and you actually do care about them as a human being.
Yeah.
You're not just using words, placating them, saying, "Oh, how was your day?" And then they answer, and then you're on your phone and you're ignoring them. It's clear that you actually don't care. You're just doing the obligatory, "How are you doing?" And then you move on, and you haven't even listened to anything they said.
Yeah, it comes out patronizing.
Yeah, I'm talking about actually care about them as an individual, as a human being. I think that is the heart and the foundation of any good culture. It's not that difficult. And again, we all have good days and bad days, but on balance, I think if at your core you want to be treated well by other people, regardless of their socioeconomic status, regardless of anything, treat other people that same way how you want to be treated. And I think that one simple principle will go years in improving your culture. And like you said, when you have let's focus on the management team who has been around for a long time and doesn't have that, it's almost impossible to change that. You almost have to clean house and get a whole new management company or management team so that you can, kind of reset the culture, so to speak.
Yeah, and some of them have been doing it for 30 years. So it is extremely hard when that's been ingrained in for so long. Old dog, new tricks, it's just really hard.
And I think change for all of us as humans is hard. I even find myself, especially as I get older, I like change less and less. And I think part of the reason that I am leaning into, and I've had to train it, new people coming in and new fresh perspectives is because it gives me an opportunity to catch myself when I'm thinking, no, that's not how we do it. Or when someone suggests a change, and as opposed to automatically having a negative feeling or thought, I catch myself saying, listen, open, view this positively as someone's providing you feedback, something you haven't heard before. And I don't know what that is about age. Do you experience that same thing as you get older and older? You like change less and less?
Well, you become comfortable, and anything that shakes that comfortable, it's a new thought. It's a new, I got to deal with this now. I got to come up with. It's like technology. You see it evolve and change. And when you're a kid, you're, new of technology. Yes. Now it's like, another new technology. I don't know how to do this. I give up. Kid, 14-year-old, show me how to do this thing here.
That's so true. Technology is a perfect example. Well, we've been talking for almost an hour and a half now. As I said, we could go on, and we will go on, and we're not going to do it necessarily in consecutive episodes, but there are so many additional episodes that we'll have and cover so many other topics that we haven't. But to wrap up this episode, Caleb, is there anything that you want to share with our audience relating to the topics we've talked about today that we haven't mentioned?
Not anything related, but I think that since we talked about culture a lot, that treat others as you want to be treated. Everybody should right now go out, write that down, and put it somewhere on a little plaque where you see it every day and think, did I treat my customers, my employees, my everybody exactly how they would like to be treated? And because a lot of times we forget it. I forget it. You get in a situation and you start yelling at somebody. You don't even think about it. We're not perfect. I'm not perfect. But if you had that little message sitting there looking at it every day, you're like, you know what? That was wrong. Maybe I should tone that down next time.
And it's interesting you say that because we didn't even talk about, you've heard me say this before. We often hurt the most those closest to us because we're so comfortable. And so one of the things we didn't talk about, but we will in another episode, is what it's like to be in business with family. Because I know a lot of you out there are either in business with family, and I'm sure you can add a lot of advice and perspective, or you're thinking about getting into business with family and or friends. I think that's similar. Family adds a whole different level of dynamics because every family has problems just inherently because that's the nature of families. You have good ups and downs and all arounds, and everybody always thinks that their family is the most messed up. Well, no, we're all sinful human beings and all of our families are messed up in some way or another. That's part of the fun of life. But then you bring the business aspect to it. So we'll have to cover that in another episode because I think that's a really relevant topic to a lot of entrepreneurs that are out there. Well, Caleb, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
As always, this has been a really fun conversation. We'll have more of these. Thank you guys so much for joining us again for another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. As I always say, this podcast is only as good as we collectively make it. If there's things that you want us to cover, guests that you want us to have on or try to get on, conversations or topics that you want me to cover, you want me and Caleb to cover that we haven't talked about, burning questions or situations that you have going on in your company and you're not sure how to resolve it and you want the perspective of all of our listeners, please email me, andrew@theandrewhollandpodcast.com. You can also go to the website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, click on Contact Us. One of the best ways to get direct feedback from me relatively quickly, follow me on Twitter. Holland Podcast is my Twitter handle. Again, Holland Podcast. And lastly, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, where you'll get an updated notification every week when the video version posts. You'll remember from a couple episodes ago, if you weren't watching the video, you missed a very beautiful, colorful parrot, Benson, and so you miss out when you don't watch the video. Caleb and I will be working on a new studio set, a new location and a new studio set with a beautiful background, so that probably won't come out for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. I always hate to give time frames because then business gets really busy and then things change. But a nice background, and you won't be able to take advantage of that when it happens if you're not viewing the podcast every once in a while. Thank you again so much for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Just a reminder, this is a podcast about business. We talk about finances. We talk about legal. Don't take anything you hear directly from this podcast or any podcast, especially if it's legal or financial advice, and apply it to your specific situation without getting the relevant help. You always want to make sure that you're consulting the appropriate professionals in your area, your industry, for your specific situation. Thank you again so much for joining us this Wednesday, and we'll talk again next week. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Be sure to visit our website, theandrewhollandpodcast.com, for additional content on business, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Andrew Holland Podcast, to get notifications when new podcasts have been released. And lastly, follow us on Twitter, Holland Podcast. That's Holland Podcast, for all the conversations we're having outside the podcast. Thanks again so much for joining us this week. Have a great day, and we'll talk again next week.